English translation, 252nd contact. Tuesday, 14th of February, 1995, 23:41 hours.
There I am again, friend Edward, as I promised you on the 3rd of February to bring you the money for the stickers. 500 francs are from me, and 1,500 francs from Quetzal, which he could spare from his collection, because he had double. However, we would like to have some stickers for ourselves because we want to collect it.
Of course. Thanks to both of you, also from the group members. But do you still have some time today because I still have some questions?
I am not in a hurry.
Well, thank you. Another question because of our new elections of the board on 3.10. 1998. Can you explain everything again to me that I can write it down this time for all cases, so that no errors develop?
Certainly. For the office of the board, some previous board members remain, while others must be changed. The changes are based on a provision which states that some members of the board only hold one term of office, such as Cornelia Wechter, Maria Wechter, Calliope Meier, Jacobus Bertschinger. Calliope Meier holds a term of office as vice president according to the provision and must, as a result of this provision, pass on this office after the expiry of her term of office, whereby for her office a new election from the following members is to be elected optionally by a new election provision. Optional for Vice President, Chairman, Board Member Engelbert Wächter, Barbara Harnisch, Christina Gasser, Christian Frehner. Engelbert Wächter holds the office as President, Chairman, Executive Board according to the regulation, after which he has to hand it over to a new president according to the regulation. Andreas Schubiger, President, our Chairman, Executive Board. Andreas Schubiger does not belong to the former fallible ones, but to that small group who were evolutionarily helpful to the fallible ones. Atlant Beery has been appointed as your proxy for life or as your one-time successor. He is also not one of the fallible. Atlant Platon Socrates Beery, proxy leader, successor leader. Cornelia Wechter has a term of office as a member of the board and has to hand over this office to Wolfgang Adolf Stauber, Board of Directors. Maria Wechter also has only one term of office to complete as a member of the board and passes this office on. Christina Gasser, Board of Directors. Bernadette Brand has 2 terms of office as a secretary of the Board of Directors and will therefore continue to hold this office. Bernadette Brand, Board of Directors Secretary. If further board members are to be elected, for example, Vice Presidency of Engelbert Wächter or Christina Gasser, then Christian Frehner, Filia Stauber, Barbara Harnisch, and Edith Belde are to be nominated. Actuarial assistant proxies are considered. Brunhilde Koya, Proxy Secretary. Eva Beery shall hold the office of a member of the Board of Directors for 2 periods, as well as an accountant and treasurer, in accordance with her terms of office, so that these 3 offices shall remain occupied by her. Eva Susanna Beery, Treasurer, Accountant, Board Member. Louis Memper shall hold the office of a member of the Board of Directors for 2 periods, as well as a proxy secretary in accordance with his appointment, provided that these 2 offices remain occupied by him. Louis Memper, Proxy Secretary, Board Member. Engelbert Wächter holds the office of a member of the board for 2 periods according to his determination. So an office of the board must be filled by Engelbert Wächter, Board of Directors. Guido Moosbrugger holds the office of a member of the Board of Directors for 2 periods according to his appointment, but he himself has to decide on a further period for an acceptance into office. In the positive case, a position of the Executive Committee must be filled by Guido Moosbrugger, Board of Directors. At the end of the 2nd election period, the next new elections must take place on Saturday, the 6th of October 2018, whereby also old board members can again be elected to the board along with new ones. The proxy leader remains for the duration of the life of the current leadership and then takes over the leadership of the Free Community of Interests, FIGU, at the death of the latter. by designation for life. The successor of this leading person, who will be Atlant Platon Socrates Bieri, will be determined once again by himself, as is also the case now. Thereafter, the successors to the leaders must each be determined by an overall group decision of the core group members of the center, whereby the fixed term of office must also be observed, as is the case for the board members, whereby a fixed term of office lasts 20 years. If any particular board member fails for the next term for any reason, then new permanent board members shall be elected from the core group for the normal term of 20 years. If any members of the board of directors resign between two normal election periods for any reason, their alternates shall take up their positions, but only until the next ordinary election as provided in the Articles of Association and bylaws. The new electors can only vote until the next ordinary election period of their office, after which the new elections have to take place. In the case of new elections for the new election period, the proxies of the board of directors must also be newly elected. All proxies who have so far held office must give up their previous office, but they can stand for re-election in order to be re-elected if necessary. This shall also apply to the members of the board of directors if, after the second election period in 2018, the term of the offices in accordance with the regulations has ended. Of course, predetermined members can also refuse their office if they can provide a logical reason for doing so. However, this should only be possible for purely health reasons. For example, if physical, mental, or consciousness-based illnesses, etc., occur, whereby the office can no longer be occupied and fulfilled. The purpose of all core group members is to commit themselves to the mission in their lives for as long as it is physically and healthily possible for them in every respect. All of them have determined this equally.
Does this also apply to all other work, and also to the night watch?
Certainly, these are obligations that have been decided by a provision. Therefore, they are also valid until life's end, or simply until the physical psyche and consciousness no longer allow this.
Good. Thank you. I have been asked about it several times.
That will still be the case in the future.
What I could do without.
Of course.
Tell me, my friend, you promised me that you would still want to go to the High Council. Precisely because of my question on February 3rd, whether I may talk about what I know about various matters concerning extraterrestrials who do not belong to you, Playar and Federation?
Certainly I have done that. With our withdrawal, you are no longer bound to the duty of confidentiality imposed on you, except in those matters which relate to us, and thus also to our safety. Outside of this obligation, you are therefore free from the obligation of secrecy.
So then I may also talk about those things that concern the American Army and the CIA, for example.
That is correct, but you should be careful, because especially the CIA and other American organizations are not squeamish when it comes to keeping unpleasant things secret.
And does the ban on speaking still apply to yourselves even if I may now speak?
Of course. From our side, we are not allowed to make any official statements because we are not allowed to interfere in any matters. However, if you talk about it from now on, even if you have the information from us, then that is your concern.
I do not want to do anything that is not in your interest.
This is not the case because we are not directly involved ourselves. We just have to keep ourselves out. We are no longer involved in it in the future. We have done and completed our work, to which you have also contributed a very large part through the UFO controversy, which has been triggered by your help in a worldwide form, even if you have been attacked by it and accused of fraud, which will continue to be the case from certain unreasonable circles. Envy and hatred play as fundamental a role as the attempt to smother the truth. But it is already too late for that. Because of your efforts and the controversy that is now going on, the authorities and the military, as well as the secret services, etc., will be forced to reveal their knowledge and their records bit by bit. This will not happen overnight, but the controversy will make it inevitable. You have laid out the seed and made it germinate, so that a fruit will emerge from it which will ripen, and this time is not too far away. But you must be aware of the fact that now more than ever attempts are being made to suppress the truth by all means, because certain circles, as you like to say, see their hopes dashed.
The slanderer Cal Korff certainly plays a very important role, as I was told by telephone from America 2 days ago.
That is right. This deceiver is in fact also a slanderer, behind whom not only envy and hatred form a great driving force, but also other things and people who want to completely suppress and destroy the truth.
I have one more question. You have often denied things that have been interpreted differently by Earthlings, as true and given. How is that to be understood?
We certainly did that, it is true. But this was always due to the fact that we were not allowed to talk about it because of our duty of secrecy, or because the facts of the questions did not correspond exactly with reality or truth, or because there were simply inconsistencies that made things appear in the wrong light. It was also often the case that the questions were not purposeful enough, and consequently negating or disclaiming answers were given. But we were always honest and never told the untruth, even if we sometimes talked about it, in which you are also a master.
You mean that you often were just beating around the bush?
That is the meaning of my words.
Something else. The fundamentalists of Islam are causing more and more trouble, as are new right-wing extremist groups. Is there anything else you could tell me about it?
Especially in high schools and universities in Europe and America, new right-wing extremist groups are forming that are dedicated to terrorism under the guise and appearance of being religious conservative groups, and from which much disaster threatens to emerge. Also, the fundamentalists of Islam begin to group themselves more and more and grow up into a dangerous power which opposes all faith forms, which are not the same as theirs. Their goal is the total fundamentalization of their faith, with all other religions or their members being forced to do so as well. Their goal is to be controlled and achieved through terrorism, whereby it ultimately leads to bloody religious wars, and from which the Third World War may also emerge.
Very unpleasant, as well as other things, for example in America, where again someone claims to be in contact with energy and light beings from the Pleiades. This time, it is a woman whose name I have unfortunately forgotten again, but who is said to have written a book about alleged teachings from the Pleiadians, etc., which will also appear in German and will be a cult book in America.
I know that. It is about a certain BM, Barbara Marciniak, who in her madness is also active as a trance medium, but who is truthfully nothing else than a cunning deceiver and fantasist. Of the same kind as the American FB. She cons Earth humans and herself with alleged contacts to an energy collective from the Pleiades star cluster. Truthfully, there exist only very young, blue, and extremely hot stars, which do not carry any life in any form, neither in gross material nor half material, nor in spiritual form. All the assertions of this deceiver and fantasist correspond to her very own invention and fantasy, and do not even have a tiny fiber of truth, except perhaps for a few things which she has acquired from writings in which, to a lesser or greater extent, our contact conversations between you and us have been reproduced. These writings, moreover, being mostly made without your permission, with material stolen from you. and that on the Pleiades there is no life of any intelligent form or other kind, not even as an energy collective or similar Earth-humanly invented nonsense. We have an explanation for this from the level of Arahat Athersata, which inquired about it to the highest spirit form level of all existing high spirit form levels, Pitale, and received the answer from it, which Arahat Athersata already knew before. Namely, that there are actually no intelligent forms of energy or even life forms of any kind on the Pleiades, as this is also the case on Venus, Saturn, and Jupiter, as well as on Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus, if microorganisms are excluded. The Pleiades, with their approximately 62 million years of life, according to earthly age determination, are still far too young to accommodate life. Moreover, the Pleiades are of the kind that will never carry any life of energetic or material form, for their existence will only be short before they very quickly pass away again and dissolve again into interstellar energy, from which one day gases and new formations will emerge again.
Thank you. I actually wanted to know if anything else had been decided in the meantime regarding your presence here on the Earth. During the last conversation, you told me confidentially that despite your departure, a patrol might still return.
That is right. Such a decision was indeed made. There are also already several crewless and 2 crewed units here again, which carry out their observation flights and tasks around the planet.
And the 2 crewed flying objects? Are they coming down to the Earth too?
Yes, because the crew members will also often be at the center for recreational purposes. However, no contacts are maintained by them.
Of course not. That was not to be expected.
Exactly.
You promised me last year that you would clarify what happened to Jichi Ustinov, because I have not heard from him since 1956 when he, Asket, and I were together. But you have not yet told me if you have found anything out.
That unfortunately slipped my mind, actually. It is actually as you suspected. Jichi died in Kazakhstan on the 6th of August 1992 at the age of 95 of a peaceful death. As I found out, he kept silent about his experiences with Asket and you until the end of his life.
Thank you. Something else. Still crazy stories around because of the crop circles in England, and now also in different other countries of Earth. I find it simply extremely idiotic that extraterrestrials should be so stupid as to make themselves noticeable in this manner among with the Earth humans. Even more stupid, however, I find those who are of this moronic opinion that extraterrestrials really could not try to come up with any better contact attempt possibilities, even though they have such a horrendous technology that it just crashes and bangs.
All poor lunatics, if I may say so with your words. It is simply unbelievable that so-called adult Earth humans believe in such nonsense and mischief and are also still convinced of it.
Well, that is all I really wanted to hear. Then another question. At the moment, a book is being traded everywhere that has the title, A Very Special Juice, Urine. Urine plays the important role of a common remedy. What is to be thought of it? In my opinion, it should not be possible that the urea, as well as other, and perhaps still unknown substances of urine, actually have healing powers that can cure various diseases. What do you think?
Your assumption is correct, because human urine, like that of animals, actually has no healing powers.
And why would the urine be used if the whole thing is not true in terms of healing? However, many claim that it should be drunk, and there are actually some who do. Others say that urine should only be used as a dip or rubbing agent for moles, eczema, and inflammation. What is true now?
Neither is correct. Natural and fresh urine cannot be used for eczema, moles, and inflammation of all kinds, not even undiluted. If the urine is drunk, then this can also not be done in accordance with the disease in question, which is to be treated and cured. Undiluted urine does not apply to certain internal and external diseases either, because neither pure urine nor a large dilution of only a few drops per glass of cold water is sufficient for internal and external diseases, as it is claimed, because as in usual homeopathy, which in principle also includes urine, neither smaller nor larger dilutions are sufficient, as a result of which the alleged medicine also has no signaling effect, no impulse message that is absolutely sufficient and healing.
Then another question. On the 18th of May 1991, it was, I think, the 238th official contact, we spoke of sudden infant death. You said at the time that sudden death might occur because children, or adults, inhaled too much carbon dioxide. But you did not say why.
The process is basically simple. Small children, or even older children, or even adults who sleep lying on their stomachs, emit carbon dioxide through their breathing, which is deposited as odorless gas in the pillows and bed linen, etc. This is then inhaled again instead of good air, causing a lack of oxygen and other important substances, leading to unconsciousness and sudden death. This process rarely occurs in older children or adults, but it can actually affect them. As a rule, however, such occurrences occur more frequently in small children because they are still not strong enough and not sufficiently trained with regard to the function of their brain. This is where extremely important processes take place that have not yet developed to such an extent that they are fully functional, especially in small children. This deficiency only resolves itself with increasing age, which means that the danger of sudden carbon dioxide death becomes ever smaller. Nevertheless, there are also older children and adults who do not fully develop their ability to function. The vital function in this respect takes place in the brainstem, where the cells are not sufficiently developed to detect impulses and signals that warn of excessive levels of carbon dioxide in the blood. Since the carbon dioxide enters the blood through the respiratory tract, which is normally supplied with oxygen in this wise. Another malfunction is that too little signal or impulse substance is produced, so that no warning can be given if the carbon dioxide content becomes excessive.
You told me during your last visit that atomic bomb tests would soon be done again. I thought that was finally over.
That will unfortunately not be the case because not only China is driving the tests further, but France will also start anew with it, against all worldwide protests. The new president of France, Jacques Chirac, will be responsible for this. He must be called a criminal of humanity and does not know any responsibility at all. He is as self-opinionated as Saddam Hussein in Iraq and Karadzic in former Yugoslavia, and so on.
I will collect signatures to protest against this.
That is very gratifying, and others will do the same. But there will be no success. Jacques Chirac is so incorrigible and irresponsible that he will never listen to the voice of his people or to the voice of the whole world.
Unfortunately, he is not the only one, as you said. Another question. What is to be thought of beauty pageants and bodybuilding, and of models in the framework, like here on Earth?
Beauty pageants are inhumane because they are a human meat show and a trade in human meat by which people are judged solely by their outward appearance. Bodybuilding is also something unnatural like beauty pageants or masculine competitions, etc., because it not only disfigures the whole body in a disgusting wise, but it also damages the whole body. With regard to models, I would like to say that nothing wrong can be seen in the model presentation, except for the way in which the models move and behave unnaturally and value themselves and their personality higher than they really are.
Then what is to be thought of the fashion of glaring colors?
People who wear glaring colors testify that they want to attract attention because they suffer from some inferiority complex. Bright dress colors testify to the fact that the wearer has a self-esteem that is lax and miserable. This is an ancient wisdom that has been confirmed for millions of years.
Then another question. You once explained to me that Alzheimer's disease is also triggered in certain cases by aluminium that gets into the brain. But why does aluminium get into the brain?
Alzheimer's disease is basically gene-controlled, and in this form, in certain cases, too much aluminum is transported into the brain as a result.
Alzheimer's is a genetic disease?
That is what I said, yes.
One did not tell me that when I asked them once. But what about the aluminum? Is that the real trigger of Alzheimer's disease?
No, not at all. You did not seem to understand me correctly because I explained that the disease is genetic. In this form, a change in the cell metabolism occurs in the brain over time, which leads to the formation of protein deposits, which also leads to brain reduction and brain mass compaction, and so on.
I was not told that either.
You also did not ask for it.
What important role does aluminium play in this?
In a few cases, this metal can also be a trigger for this process. But this is very rarely the case. In order to really correct this disease, the corresponding gene would have to be manipulated.
This brings me directly to the idea that this could already be a genetic manipulation that the powers in the Sirius regions had already carried out in ancient times in order to prepare the fighting machines in such a wise that sooner or later they would die of it.
Your thought processes are amazing, because it actually occurred in that manner.
Then other diseases such as cancer, etc., could be equally genetically programmed?
This is indeed the case, because a whole number of serious and most serious diseases that appear in humanity on Earth have been programmed in a genetically manipulated form. In order to free oneself from this, however, the humanity of Earth or its scientists must learn how to deal with genetic manipulation, for which we release impulses in a responsible manner. However, the path of development will be very long, because the research and the successes resulting from it must not overflow so that damage is not done again.
Thank you very much for this important information. But tell me, dear friend, that once you explained that the Swiss army and so forth also supported the atomic bomb. What is this all about?
After the American atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, many high Swiss military and government officials were found to be of the serious opinion that the Swiss Air Force must also have atomic bombs. This irresponsibly mad idea was strictly upheld until well into the 60s, when even a Swiss nuclear test site was chosen, which was moved to the Gotthard area.
It could not be more crazy and irresponsible. It is simply unbelievable.
We were of the same opinion.
May I ask where the name Pleiaren, respectively Pleiadian, comes from in your language?
This has been explained to you before. Apparently you forgot. But I want to explain it to you another time. The name, which by the way was also transferred from our original languages into earthly languages, comes from the personal names Pleios, who follows the laws of creation, Pleja, Plejada, who sets 7 stars for sevenness, Plejados, who knows the laws of sevenness, Plejara, who respects the laws of sevenness, and Plejaros, who teaches the laws of unity.
Then something very personal. Quetzal once explained that I had covered 3.5 million kilometers on Earth, of which about 1/10 was on foot. What time does that refer to? That was never explained to me, and there are always differences of opinion. I would be glad if you could give me some clarity if you are oriented in this matter.
That is not a problem. The mileage refers to the first 40 years of your life. And the 3.5 million total kilometers of your travels on Earth also include all the distances you have covered with Svath, Asket, my daughter Simyase, and Quetzal on or around the Earth, apart from the many hundreds of millions of kilometers you have covered in the Sol system. In about 1/10 of the total kilometers, that is to say about 350,000 kilometers, you have covered on foot in 40 years. This corresponds to an annual performance of 8,650 kilometers and a daily average of around 24 kilometers. And that is really to be regarded as an average, because you have often done several times as much per day, but often less.
Thank you. That was finally clear. And now I have a question that has been on my mind for years. Other dimensions and other universes. Do the same physical laws apply in them as in our universe and in our dimension?
No, that is not the rule. The laws of physics are different in other dimensions and universes if they are not aligned to the Dern universe, that is to say, to our universe. So, there must be a rectification of the kind of the universe as well as its age, as this is the case, for example, with the Dal universe, which embodies a twin universe of the Dern universe, as is known. If the same laws of physics are to prevail in other dimensions or universes, then all their physical concerns must be aligned with those of our universe. Otherwise, other physical laws are given.
Because of the atomic bomb experiments of the French, who want to carry them out again, does this not trigger enormous earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, etc. again?
That is right. According to our investigations, the first heavy blow will hit New Zealand, where the Ruapehu volcano will become active again because it is the closest to the Mururoa Atoll. However, further volcanoes will follow worldwide, whereby likewise in worldwide form many earthquakes of partly destructive masses will appear. First, there will be only smaller earthquakes. But then comes the first big one in Turkey, where a city called Dinar is almost completely destroyed. Japan will also suffer again, as will many other countries around the globe. All this will not simply be short-term, however, because the effects of the criminal bomb tests will still show up after 50 and more years, because many things in Earth's interior will shift and change disadvantageously to the planet, whereby not only heavy and light earthquakes and volcanic eruptions will be given, but also more and more natural events such as droughts and dry periods, floods, heavy hailstorms, typhoons, hurricanes and windstorms, as well as other storms, etc. These coming events are therefore not only connected with the ever-increasing pollution and destruction of the environment, but also with the subterranean and submarine atomic bomb experiments, which continue to be carried out not only by the French, but also by the Chinese, who also act criminally against humanity and the planet. Nuclear radiation, which is released in spite of all subterranean tests, has been contributing to this for a long time now, because it is true that the atomic bombs abused for atomic bomb tests were torn apart by the tremendous explosions to such an extent that cracks appeared many meters wide and 10 to 12 kilometers long, through which the radioactive radiation can escape unhindered. All French assurances that this is not the case are deliberate lies.
Then another question about the megalomaniac Swiss who wanted to build an atomic bomb themselves. Are there any other things related to this?
Certainly there are. For example, the fact that at that time the Swiss Federal Council, without the consent and knowledge of the people, commissioned Federal Councillor P. Chaudet to sign an accession agreement with B. Montgomery from England, which included that Switzerland would join NATO in the event of a nuclear war.
Paul Chaudet was president of the Confederation twice, no? As far as I know, he was first elected in 1959 and the second time in 1962.
That is right.
To what extent should sport actually be practiced, or should top physical performances be carried out?
Normal physical activity is healthy for the body, psyche, and consciousness. But beyond that, everything is harmful to health, whereby in particular the so-called elite sport, as well as other continuous elite performance and elite training often lead to fatal consequences, namely because the biochemical processes occurring in the body trigger damage, which can even lead to cancer, which is very often the result of these unreasonable activities when great efforts are made. The human being is not created for such peak performance in permanent succession, and furthermore, the Earth human suffers under the burden of the many kinds of genetic manipulations which were carried out in primeval times on the ancestors by the mighty Syrians, whereby the most distant descendants who live on the earth today are susceptible to an enormous number of diseases which, however, can only appear as a result of such genetic manipulations.
Then I would like to ask you once again about our contacts. This is now the 252nd official contact. But in the last few years, and in fact since 1989, there have been a number of unofficial contacts again, but I do not know their number and I have not written them down. Can you tell me how many these are so far, and how many contacts took place with Asket at that time? With Svath there were 42.
I can give you information about this because these concerns are current to me. You actually had 42 physical contacts with Svath, but there are also 198 purely telepathic contacts. With Asket, there were 116 physical contacts and 163 purely telepathic contacts. With us from the planet Era, you had 252 official physical and telepathic contacts, and their 49 unofficial physical contacts, along with 268 purely telepathic contacts. So today you can look back on a total of 459 official contacts that have taken place since your childhood to the present date of the 14th of February, 1995. Unofficial telepathic contacts totaled 629 until today.
Thank you. Then let me ask you a question about Mars. In this regard, you told me that I had to keep silent about the facts of the so-called Mars channels until about the beginning of 1995, after which it could be said that they were once naturally washed-out channels, but that these are actually not deep channels, but rather huge canyons, which in some cases were filled by coarse, dark sand, which was drawn from the volcanoes or crater cones, and from the large plains by the incredibly strong Mars winds and carried into various of the former deep channels. But there are also the small hollow sand globules and sand tubes that were formed by the evaporation of salt water, as you, Ptah, explained to me. Does that still have to remain a secret, or is it okay to talk about it?
That is right. You may talk about it now.
Then I now have a question that has preoccupied me for a long time. Why did practically all your ancestors choose solar systems and worlds to live in, which are in a different space-time continuum than we are here?
Extrasolar planetary systems in solar systems in this space-time structure of the Dern universe can be found relatively seldom because they are extremely rare. In the dimension in which we and all the other Hanok lineage groups live. On the other hand, there are many solar systems in which planets are also classified, and which are also capable of carrying a variety of life. Already our earliest ancestors traveled the dimension that is time-shifted to this space-time continuum, in which we live. Consequently, it is known to us and all Hanok lineage groups since ancient times.
What does that mean in relation to planetary solar systems?
In this space-time continuum of our Dern universe, many planets probably exist in many solar systems, but they are extremely thinly arranged in relation to our dimension, if I may say so. This means that the many planetary solar systems lie very far apart in this galaxy, The Milky Way, while in our dimension and in our galaxy, many solar systems with planets lie very close to each other or are arranged more closely to each other.
So this is caused differently depending on the dimension?
Right. Because in every dimension of a universe there are different prerequisites and often different physical laws, as I already explained to you.
Either Simyase or Quetzal once explained to me that the finest form of antimatter is one of many factors that causes aging. How is that to be understood?
Unfortunately, I am not allowed to talk officially about this, which is why the explanation must be that it is only a very fine form of antimatter, which as such is not comparable with the actual antimatter and which we ourselves discovered only about 22 years ago. This form of antimatter also does not cause the same thing as the actual antimatter, but in a protracted process it produces an enzyme type in the cells, which is called galactositis by earthly scientists, whereby the process is genetically controlled. In this form, there is a certain connection between the finest antimatter form mentioned above and aging. I am not allowed to explain more officially.
Then do not. One question. Prostitution. Is this not also caused by monogamy? I think that monogamy cultivates it to a great extent. What do you think?
You are not wrong with your assumption. Our ancestors already had this experience with us, which is why monogamy was abolished a very long time ago. And as a result, polygamy gradually prevailed, which is what we have today, and with which we are not only extremely satisfied, but also have very good experiences. And as I explained to you once before, prostitution is no longer known to us. However, the ethical consciousness of our races, which has developed into a very high form and out of which no more wrong actions arise, also contributed to this to a great extent. Every person of our races has such a highly developed ethics consciousness that sexual relations outside of an open or closed marriage alliance no longer appear. In the case of necessary sexual instincts of non-marital allies, the practice of one's own sexual instincts satisfaction is applied, or the surging sexual instincts are meditatively brought under control, unless a marriage-like partnership exists that permits sexual practices, whereby such a partnership is not regarded as a marriage alliance, but as an open marriage-like relationship.
Another question. Animals, as more rarely humans, are often misled by magnetic disturbances, both on land and in water and in the air. We have talked about this before. But afterwards you said that the animals would also be affected by another very dangerous factor. Unfortunately, you explained this outside of the contact conversation, which is why none of it was written down. If I understood correctly, then you explained that the animals would also be affected by the so-called noise pollution to the point of fatal form if they were harassed by low or high tones inaudible to humans, which affect their own low or high tones, which they need for navigation. All other human-made sounds and noises of any kind are also capable of disturbing the animals in their navigation, because these sounds and noises, etc., superimpose those low or high sounds which are emitted for navigation or communication purposes. If, however, these navigation sounds are superimposed by noise, as is the case with human noise, for example ship engines and propellers, aircraft engines and jet engines, or other engines of all kinds, explosions and engine noise of all kinds, and other various sources of noise that produce certain disturbing sound waves. Then the animal navigation system is disturbed to such an extent that, for example, marine animals are stranded or land animals plunge over cliffs, etc. in droves. Such murderous sources of noise also include bomb tests of all kinds, as well as bomb droppings and gunfire, etc. for certain animal species. However, in addition to noise pollution, radio waves are also harmful or even fatal, just as radio waves are also harmful for humans. as are strong electromagnetic waves emanating from high-voltage power lines and transformer stations, etc. However, the so-called normal electrosmog should also be mentioned in this context. Have I explained all this correctly?
It all corresponds exactly to the explanations I have given you.
That was all I had to ask.
Then I want to say goodbye now, because I still have a lot to do.
Goodbye, and best regards to everyone.